watching All 24 News World News Program live from the capital. Algiers. Up next are tonight's top stories. As Gaza ceasefire begins, hundreds of thousands return home as occupation troops pull back. Palestinian factions welcome support for rebuilding but reject any foreign control over the Strip. Next up in Morocco, anger grows as heavy sentences are issued for protesters and the government ignores the demands. Also coming up tonight in Sudan, the UN warns of a horrific and tragic situation in Al-Fasher, with hospitals under fire and cholera spreading. And later on, Russian strikes plunge eastern Ukraine into darkness, while the United States and NATO push to end the war amid Putin's new arms race threats. Welcome back to the details. A ceasefire took effect Friday morning in the Gaza Strip as the Zionist army began withdrawing its forces toward the so-called Yellow Line under the first phase of the Trump ceasefire plan approved earlier by the Zionist occupation government. According to Zionist media, the truce began at noon with forces redeployed along new operational lines. Hamas, Islamic Jihad movement, and the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine jointly rejected any foreign guardianship over Gaza, insisting its governance is a purely Palestinian matter. They affirmed their readiness to welcome Arab and international support for rebuilding the Strip.
We emphasize our outright rejection of any foreign guardianship and affirm that determining the form of governance in the Gaza Strip and the foundations of institutional work is a purely internal Palestinian matter to be decided collectively by our national components.
Thousands of displaced Palestinians returned to their homes in Gaza City and the northern Strip through Rashid Street following the ceasefire and the withdrawal of Zionist occupation forces to new redeployment lines. Footage from Friday morning showed crowds of Gazans heading north along the coastal road toward Gaza City, which had endured a devastating Zionist assault just days earlier. Zionist occupation forces began a gradual withdrawal Friday morning to the so-called Yellow Lines, marking the first pullback under the Trump ceasefire plan. Media reports said several brigades left the Gaza Strip after the Zionist government approved the agreement, which includes an initial troop withdrawal and the exchange of prisoners and detainees. Meanwhile, U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff confirmed on an X platform that the first phase of the withdrawal had been completed, noting that the 72-hour period for releasing hostages has officially begun. For the displaced and starving, the ceasefire brings a fragile hope for safety, a return to what remains of their homes, and the chance for a decent life. More on this story with Nabil Khazini.
A ceasefire has brought relief and also disbelief. People in Gaza begin to move slowly, cautiously toward the north. The road that once buzzed with life is now a path of quiet movement. Naveen is one of them. For her, the end of the war feels unreal. She lost everything: her husband, parents, siblings, and nephews. Yet despite the rubble, despite the terror that still lingers in the air, she's heading back home.
Displacement was very difficult. We left with a debt, and we will return in debt. But this return, even if we were to pay everything in the world, the important thing is to return to our lands and our homes, and to return to Gaza. We are very, very happy that it all stopped. Thank God.
Thousands like Naveen are returning to what's left. The journey is long, often over 20 kilometers, but they are walking with purpose, their feet pressing into the same dust that had witnessed so much suffering. The war had displaced almost all of Gaza's 2.2 million residents, creating a humanitarian disaster that left the population in search of shelter, food and safety.
I am not happy at all because I'm going to collect the body of my brother who was martyred near Al Uyun. He was struck by an F-16 and I am going to get him. My grandchildren died and so did my daughter-in-law and all my siblings were martyred. They were all martyred. Where am I going? And what would make me feel good? There are no feelings at all, but complete frustration.
In the midst of despair, there is hope, and in their return, there is a quiet act of defiance, the will to survive, to rise again from the ashes.
As the U.S. brokered ceasefire holds, a grim recovery effort is underway across Gaza. Medical sources report that rescue teams have recovered the bodies of more than 100 Palestinians killed in earlier occupation strikes, with over 70 found in Gaza City alone. However, the fragile calm was broken Friday morning when occupation forces opened fire in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood, north of Gaza City, killing one Palestinian and wounding others. This attack, occurring after the ceasefire took effect, underscores the ongoing tensions, even as the agreement offers a measure of hope to the displaced. UNICEF on Friday urged the opening of all crossings to allow food aid into Gaza, warning of a sharp rise in child deaths due to severe malnutrition and weakened immunity. Spokesperson Ricardo Perry described the situation as critical, noting that both newborns and infants face life-threatening conditions after months of food deprivation.
UNICEF is ready. The aid must flow. Israel must open as many entry points as possible. The situation is critical. We risk seeing a massive spike in child deaths, not only neonatal, but also infants, given their immune systems are more compromised than ever before, nor have they had access to proper food for what it's now years. To add to this cold winter, without adequate shelter and clothing, will be lethal.
The United Nations announced Friday that it will begin large-scale humanitarian deliveries to Gaza starting Sunday. In a statement, the UN said around 170,000 metric tons of food, medicine, and other essential supplies are ready to enter the Strip, pending Zionist approval to expand aid access. Moving on to another topical development in the Middle East still. Syrian Foreign Minister Saad al-Shibani announced Friday that efforts are underway to restore relations between Damascus and Beirut on the basis of mutual interests and good neighborliness. Speaking after meeting his Lebanese counterpart Youssef Raji in Beirut, al-Shibani said his visit reflects Syria's new approach rooted in respect for Lebanon, adding that coordination continues to ensure the return of refugees under an international framework.
This visit reflects Syria's new approach towards Lebanon. We show the utmost respect and appreciation for Lebanon, and we respect its sovereignty and non-interference in its internal affairs. We want to overcome the obstacle of the past with Lebanon, in which we were also victims of poor relations and mismanagement of politics between the two countries. Today, there is a historic opportunity and a political and economic opportunity. We want to move the relationship between Syria and Lebanon from the volatile security relationship of the past to an advanced political and economic relationship that serves the interests of our two peoples.
For his part, Lebanese Foreign Minister Youssef Raji affirmed the goodwill shared by both countries and their commitment to strengthening bilateral ties. He highlighted a new path toward development, economic growth, and mutual cooperation.
Today, we were officially informed by the Syrian government of the suspension of the work of the Lebanese-Syrian Higher Council. God willing, very soon we will remove it completely from the law. From now on, Relations will be solely between the two states and their government directly through diplomatic channels, just like normal countries.
All the way to Morocco now, Generation Z youth resumed protests Thursday evening after a brief pause, taken to the streets in Casablanca, Marrakesh and other cities. Demonstrators called for the government's resignation, an end to corruption and normalization, and demanded social justice and dignified life.
We came out today to make our voices heard, our rights to healthcare, education, and the fight against corruption. Recently, we've seen that the government wants dialogue with the youth. We are not a political party coming out to ask for our rights. We are simply Moroccan youth who took to the streets to raise our voices. We don't want dialogue with this government, but with a new one. We want a new government that will treat us properly and give us our rights.
In recent days, Moroccan courts have handed down prison sentences of up to 20 years to Generation Z protesters who demanded better education and health care. According to local media, the Court of Appeal in Salah sentenced several youths to between 15 to 20 years for alleged involvement in violence during demonstrations, while a court in Agadir sentenced one protester to 4 years in prison and a fine of 50,000 dirhams.
The Court of Appeal in Salah issues sentences of 15 to 20 years in prison against defendant accused of involvement in acts of sabotage during recent events, while other courts postponed similar cases, still under investigation. The primary court in Agadir was the first to issue a ruling sentencing a young man to 4 years in prison and a 15,000 dirham fine for inciting to commit misdemeanor and felonies. The public prosecution has filed serious charges, including assaulting public forces, using violence against them, armed assembly, online incitement, and deliberate destruction of public and private properties, looting and vandalism.
The Generation Z movement is now demanding the release of all protesters and calling for a national dialogue to address the country's crisis.
We call for the release of all detainees whose involvement in acts of violence has not been proven, and for a national dialogue on youth issues, education, health, and social justice. And we also call for continuing mobilization in more than 20 cities, including Casablanca, Rabat, Fez, Meknes, Marrakesh, and Agadir.
Morocco's Justice and Development Party issued a strong statement condemning the government's failure to address mounting social and economic demands, describing the youth protests as evidence of flawed development policies. The party warned that growing tension stems from accumulated governance failures, citing national and international reports showing declining democratic indicators alongside rising poverty and unemployment. Elsewhere in Africa, the United Nations described the situation in Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur, as catastrophic, saying residents are besieged, terrified, and cut off from aid. UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric on Friday urged an immediate humanitarian truce in and around the city, affirming the UN's commitment to assisting civilians in Al-Fashir and across Sudan.
As global attention is drawn to many pressing events, I don't want us to overlook the tragic situation in Sudan, most horrifically in Al-Fashir, which is, you know, the besieged capital of North Darfur. Our humanitarian colleagues tell us that since the start of October alone, more than 50 people have reportedly been killed. That's what medical association and local sources are telling us. We, of course, condemn this escalation of violence and the killing of innocent civilians. The Sudan Doctors Network said that yesterday at least a dozen civilians were killed, including women and children, with 17 others injured in an attack on a hospital in El Fasher, allegedly carried out by the Rapid Support Forces. This follows reports of a deadly attack on the hospital's maternity ward on the previous day. The people of El Fasher are trapped, terrified, and cut off from aid, and their last lifeline for medical care is under threat. It goes without saying that the targeting of hospitals is to be condemned and never acceptable.
The United Nations strongly condemned the repeated attacks on hospitals and mosques in besieged Al-Fasher, North Darfur, calling them acts of genocide that must end immediately. The UN Population Fund stressed that hospitals, medical staff, and patients must never be targeted, describing the assault on Al-Fasher Maternity Hospital as a blatant violation of human rights. The General Coordinator for Displaced Persons and Refugees in Sudan announced 105 new cholera cases, including one death in the Darfur region. In a statement Friday, she said total infections have risen to over 13,500, with 570 deaths, urging residents to follow health guidelines and promptly report any suspected cases. Moving on to the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian authorities reported early Friday that eastern Kyiv lost power after intense Russian airstrikes hit energy facilities across the country. Medical sources said multiple explosions were heard Friday night, accompanied by attack drones flying over the capital. U.S. President Donald Trump announced that the United States and NATO are stepping up efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Speaking after a meeting with Finnish President Alexander Stubb, Trump said additional sanctions on Russia may be considered. Stubb expressed confidence that Trump could advance a Ukraine agreement once the Gaza ceasefire is fully implemented.
Really quickly and ask you, you're going to Walter Reed tomorrow? You said that the hostages will be released on Monday or Tuesday.
Russian President Vladimir Putin warned that any plans to transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine will prompt Moscow to strengthen its air defense system. Speaking in Dushanbe in Tajikistan, he also announced upcoming new weapon types and signaled readiness to discuss strategic deterrence with Washington. Putin added that countries planning nuclear tests should expect a Russian response if such tests proceed.
Того боевого топлива, которое в ракетах хранится. В некоторых странах об этом думают. Я думаю, что на самом деле, если говорить...
I think, frankly, there is a definite arms race going on. Whether it will send the world back to the 1990s or not is hard to say. But I didn't say that the US is preparing for the nuclear tests. I said some countries are, but that's also well known to experts, because there is always a temptation to test the effectiveness of the combat fuel that's been in missiles for many years.
In France, political deadlock deepens. After days of failed talks to replace Sébastien Lecornu, President Emmanuel Macron has reappointed him as a prime minister, a move that fuels criticism from opposition parties who are calling for snap elections or even Macron's resignation. Hossein Burkan reports now.
Hoping to end the impasse, Emmanuel Macron has now reappointed Sébastien Lecornu as prime minister, the same man who stepped down only days ago, tasking him with securing a fragile majority to pass the crucial 2026 budget, a move seen by many as desperate gamble, not a solution. But most political parties remain skeptical. They warn that any government formed under Macron is doomed to fail, just like the three short-lived cabinets over the past year. Jean-Luc Mélenchon, France on board, was the first to boycott consultations, declaring that the crisis can only be resolved through early presidential elections and that Macron himself must be the one to go.
Le départ d'Emmanuel Macron est donc...
The departure of Emmanuel Macron is a legitimate demand. He is not only facing public discontent, but perhaps even outright rejection of the heavy price the country has paid under such a degraded presidency. We do not fear it. We see it as an extraordinary opportunity to build a new political system through early presidential elections and to escape this gloomy and absurd Macronism once and for all.
Now with Le Colonel back to Matignon, Macron faces the same storm and a dangerous countdown. Le Colonel must deliver a national budget to Parliament by Monday. Failure could trigger a vote of no confidence and plunge France towards either early elections or an unprecedented resignation of the president himself.
Turning to other news, the UN Security Council held an emergency session on Friday at the request of Venezuela to address what it described as escalating U.S. aggression following Washington's deployment of warships to the Caribbean. In an official letter, Caracas condemned the unprecedented military buildup, which includes 8 warships and a nuclear-powered submarine, claiming it poses a serious threat despite Washington's claim the mission targets drug trafficking. During the session, Algeria's permanent representative to the UN, Ammar Benjama, called on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and refrain from any action or rhetoric that could further escalate tensions, stressing that diplomacy and dialogue remain the only path toward regional stability.
Algeria calls on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to avoid any action or rhetoric that could further aggravate the situation. Dialogue and diplomacy. Dialogue and diplomacy remain the only viable means to resolve dispute and maintain regional stability.
Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado has won the 2025 Nobel Peace Prize, the Norwegian Nobel Committee announced on Friday. She was selected from a field of nominees that included prominent humanitarian organizations and global leaders. Palestinians praised Algeria's unwavering support for their cause, expressing gratitude to the Algerian state and people for their solidarity and the warm reception given to their team. During Thursday's friendly match between Algeria's local national team and Palestine in Annaba, Palestinian supporters told All24 News they were overjoyed by the ceasefire agreement that ended 2 years of genocide in Gaza.
It's a feeling that we cannot describe. We have come to support our team, the Palestinian team, and back it in this circumstance. Thank God the war has stopped, and we are here to support our team, and at the end of the day, regardless who wins, the Algerian and Palestinian peoples are one. This means that the Algerian team and Algeria, people and state, firmly stand by Palestine. 1, 2, 3, long live Algeria.
That brings us to the end of our news program for tonight. For the latest updates, stay connected with us on our social media platforms as well as our website. Thanks for watching and good night.